So we're going to go on now, and we're going to deal with now the structure of the personality. And this becomes extremely fascinating, how the personality is structured, how it actually gets together. And I'm going to show you some slides for this one. We're going to go through slides for this one. But the first thing to realize is that your personality is not one single structure. It is a multiplicity of structures called sub-personalities that build up together or coagulate together so they form this one, what we call it, a faculty that's called a personality. It's like a multifaceted diamond, so it's not lots of sort of shattered bits. It's one organism, but it has many facets that are linked together for a variety of reasons, as we'll see. But each part of your personality, like a multifaceted diamond, can see and experience life in quite a different way. For instance, the facet of a diamond on this side would see the world in that way. The one next to it, the next facet, would see the world almost the same with maybe a 5% difference. But the facet on this side of the diamond would see life in a totally different way to this one on that side. And that's a good analogy to keep in your consciousness about the personality, that it's made up of these individual pieces that are locked together to form the personality. Now, many people believe they are just one sort of lump called a personality. And that's not the case. And when people believe that, what it means is that they are locked into a belief that they cannot change. I am the personality. I am this particular being, behaviors, characteristics, and that's the way it is. Like it or lump it, that's who I am. I can't change, and there we are. But that's completely incorrect, as you'll see. At any point in your life, you can change. Anybody can change at any point in their life and bring into their life the different experiences they want. And if you want to actually understand relationships, and you want to understand and be successful at career, wealth, anything like that, then it's absolutely essential that you understand personality and its structure. So I'm going to go through some slides with you, and I'm going to show you how you have built up to become who you are. And then we're going to show you how to access different parts of the personality. We're going to do a technique ourselves in this period of the course before the break. And I'll explain to you another advanced technique which led on to the technique which everybody can do on their own, just to put the whole thing together. I've just spent a week last year in America with the founders of a system to understand the subpersonalities, and I've just shot a whole lot of 30 hours of videotape, and I'm turning that into a series. So I think it's this information is so important for us all to know that it's probably one of the two major keys of understanding how life works. And if you get this one, it's like a dawning realization as to what's happening. So can we bring up the slide projector, please? Where's the little red dot? Okay, that's the last one that we've seen. Okay, we might as well bring down the spotlights just a bit there. Now, I know that for some of you that the little tiny circles might be hard to read. I will explain all of them to you as we go through, and then I will also, in your manual, there will be a printed sheet of the whole thing. We're going to build the structure of the personality up for you here. The word personality or persona comes from the word in Greek and Latin basically meaning a mask, and it refers to the mask worn by the self. A mask worn by the self. The self is that which has a personality. You are not your personality. If you say, I am a person, you're actually referring to the word persona, the same word that personality comes from. And that is not what you are. Anything that you can examine or observe or describe is not what you are. Very important point in discovery of the true self. Anything that you can examine or observe or describe is not what you are, for the very reason that there's obviously something that is observing it. And it's the something that's observing it that is the true self. But we're going to deal with that after the break here. We're going to get to the personality first now. When you are born, when you arrive on this planet, the very first thing that you are as a being is summed up as, in this system, called the vulnerable child. The vulnerable child. When you're born, you're a little infant, you are totally vulnerable. Totally vulnerable. You are helpless. You cannot feed yourself. You cannot, cook for yourself, dress yourself, wash yourself, walk, talk, etc. You are absolutely vulnerable to whoever it is that you happen to be born into the company of or find yourself in the company of. With that vulnerability comes unconditional love. A vulnerable child is unconditionally loving. It gives out its love automatically, spontaneously. Its psyche hasn't been filled with negativities unless there's been difficulties in conception, womb, birth, and so on. But basically, still fresh in an infant's psyche is the openness to experience and express unconditional love. When a baby is in its mother's arms, that baby believes itself in the first few months of its life to be the mother. It doesn't realize there is any difference between it and the mother because it's been growing within the mother's womb, heard the mother's voice, eaten what the mother's eaten, so to speak, been in the experiences the mother has had, the emotional feelings, everything. It's identified itself as the mother because it's grown out of the mother, within the mother, so to speak. Then it comes out, and of course, that belief, that identity, if you like, continues on. It sees itself as the mother. Now, if the mother, or anybody else for that matter, for whatever circumstance, not through her own fault, and don't worry if you're a mother, this is completely normal, this is the way that life builds the mind and the structure of the personality in every individual. If the mother does not give that child unconditional love 100% of the time, which again is a very difficult thing to do, she frowns, she might be cross with something else, difficulties with the bills or the husband or, the neighbor shouting at night or whatever it might be. If the mother's not giving that baby unconditional love and she's ignoring it while it's in its arms, that baby starts to freak. It starts to feel, golly, I'm being rejected. I'm being rejected. For a baby to be rejected by the mother is one step from death. Survival is the basic push, if you like, at this age. Survival. If the baby who believes it's the mother doesn't have unconditional love, but the attention is taken from it, and again, this is completely normal, it's the way life works for us all, it has to be that way. Don't feel guilty if you've been a mother, and don't ever let guilt fall into your mind because of this. The mind needs to develop this shield, if you like, to operate in life. If it doesn't get unconditional love, then it feels rejected, which is like a threat to its life, and so it starts to build up some form of protection within itself, some form of protection. And this protection is called the persona, or the mask, the personality. So we all have to do this. Obviously, if you have a bad upbringing, it forms more beach balls. If you have a loving upbringing, it forms less beach balls. But beach balls, for most people, are there, of course. Now, as you grow, you start to experiment with this personality structure. The vulnerable child, as it grows, starts to experiment with behaviors and characteristics and modes of expression, as it's testing things to see what works. So different little aspects. You've seen a child at 2 years is different from 4 years, is different from 6 years, is different from 8 years, and so on. Different trials of personality as they start to work out what works for them. And then these things start to coagulate through infancy until we reach what is called at the top there the protector-controller. Again, you'll be given a map of this. The protector-controller subpersonality. Now, the protector-controller subpersonality structure is the core of who you are and defines your life. The function of it is to protect you and to control your behavior. Your behavior and your personalities are created by two opposing factors. The first one is survival, which one step from survival is rejection. So you will do everything in your power to stop yourself being rejected because that threatens your survival, and that's a very strong biological force. So your behaviors will be caused by that desire, subconsciously, automatically, not to be rejected. One step from rejection is humiliation. So when somebody humiliates you, they are basically rejecting you, which is basically in the psyche a threat to your life. So the function of the protector-controller is to ensure that you do not behave in any way that causes you to be humiliated or rejected. Because the whole structure of your personality is built up on the vulnerable child. The protector-controller's function is to protect and control the vulnerable child within you. These things stay forever in your psyche. On the other side, the other creative factor to your personality is what is called acknowledgement or appreciation. If you behave in a way that is acknowledged and appreciated, that is the opposite to humiliation and rejection. So that when you are appreciated for something and honored for it, that behavior, whatever it is, gets locked into your psyche by the protector-controller as the way to behave in order to survive. So the whole thing comes off survival. It's very, very basic. In fact, life runs by very few basic rules. When you understand those, it's very, very easy to make it work in the way that you want it to. So in the sense of the personality. Now, what happens is, as you grow and you develop various aspects to your behaviors, these start to form together into these various subpersonality structures. The first one, and again, you probably can't read it at the back, but I'll read them out for you. The first one, on the bottom left, is called the Inner Critic. Inner Critic. And the function of the Inner Critic, and by the way, I should probably tell you that this drawing is in your manual. The Inner Critic, the function of the Inner Critic is to criticize you internally so that you do nothing that causes you humiliation or rejection, and ensures that you only do what gets you acknowledgement and appreciation. So the inner critic is that voice you hear in your head, and these are all referred to, these subpersonalities, as voices. The voice in your head that you hear going, "Oh, don't do that, you fool, what an idiot you are." You know the voice? You feel embarrassed and it goes into your mind. You know that voice? Anybody ever have that one? The Inner Critic, it's called. There's a whole book on it, in fact. The Inner Critic. Now, this is a very, very powerful part of you. The Inner Critic has an IQ of about 2,000. It can see all your faults with a magnifying glass. It has a memory of an elephant. It can remember all the things you did that caused you embarrassment and humiliation right back to the year dot. And it will remind you of them on a regular basis sometimes. The Inner Critic loves to control your behavior because its function, again, is a positive function to keep you alive. And it therefore wants you not to behave in any way that causes you humiliation. So it'll tell, when you do anything silly that you get embarrassed or you go red or whatever it is, this is the Inner Critic. "Oh, how could you, what a fool you are," and it'll torture you for days afterwards. The Inner Critic, when it is extreme, overpowered, or more appropriately and correctly listened to too much by yourself, by the awareness, that can take you down a very negative track, even to the point of suicide. People who suicide, who have not got a medical problem or a physical illness or something like that, but who just suicide for the sake of suicide, is because they're listening to the Inner Critic too much. Not only are they listening too much, they're believing it to be true, when all it is just a negative voice whose function is in fact to cause you to survive, but it starts to poison you. An inner critic that is, in many people, they have a large inner critic that they can't deal with or integrate, so they project that outside of themselves into the world, and they are what are called cynics. A person who is very cynical, a cynic, has a gigantic inner critic that they cannot accept as part of themselves, so they project that onto everybody else and the world in general, or some political movement or group activity or whatever it might be. Another aspect of the inner critic, and we all have inner critics to certain degrees, and don't worry, they're not going to make us commit suicide, it's just the odd person who's too extreme can have that, is what's called the rule maker. The rule maker, which is another subpersonality structure. It's the ones that makes the rules about life, how you should live, how you should behave, what you should do. And this rule maker is the one where if you follow any culture or society or religion or path, it stores the rules. It stores the rules of your parents, your school, and so on, and it is often referred to as the conscience. The rule maker is the conscience. It's just a psychological structure. It's not some natural innate thing or some other confused interpretation. The next subpersonality that tends to build in these days is called the analyst. The analyst. The function of the analyst is to analyze and work out what is going on. An intellectual or someone who's a great analyst might follow a life of being a philosopher, the other bubble there. But the function of an analyst is to do just that. It's a wonderful tool. Don't get me wrong, these are all good. They all have your survival, your best interests at heart. And they build because when you were young they were appreciated or acknowledged, or they were not humiliated and rejected. So the analyst will be the one that uses schoolwork, and it's a wonderful one. We all need that one to analyze today. We live in the age of the analyst, actually, with the computers and all those things. This is the age we live in. So that when you, for instance, come home with your schoolwork and you are with your parents, you show them the schoolwork, and they go, "Isn't that terrific? You got an A+ or whatever it is, aren't you clever?" You get what? Appreciated and acknowledged. So in the subconscious computer, the mind goes, "That works. You will survive with this. Behave in this way much more because it works for you." So you might start to get better and better at whatever you do that requires analysis. If you came home with your schoolwork and let's say your father said to you, "That's all rubbish, it doesn't matter. You know, you're going to be a mechanic or whatever it is, or you're going to work on the farm, that's all rubbish." Then you're what? You're not being appreciated and acknowledged for it. You're being almost humiliated, but not quite. But enough for your psyche to go, "Well, analyst isn't that important. It's not going to get me the survival that I want." So you may very well not bother to create and cultivate that subpersonality of the analyst. That's how that will work too. Appreciation and acknowledgement. Next one, very common one, the pleaser. The pleaser. Now the pleaser is a subpersonality that is very pleasing. And we've all got that one to some extent. We couldn't survive without these ones. So the pleaser is one where if you did something nice for mummy and daddy, you did washed up or something, or swept the floor, and they go, "Oh, aren't you wonderful? What a good boy, what a good girl, aren't you lovely? That you please them, in other words, you're so good." Then pleaser goes click, 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 acknowledgement, appreciation, survival, I'll play that one out some more. So you build up pleaser in your life. You may even, as you grow on, choose a career where you pick on something that is to do with caring for other people. Maybe, as you can see there, you become a rescuer. Maybe you're a surf life rescuer or a helicopter rescue person or an NRMA driver or something like that, where being the rescuer is a very powerful and potent part of your psyche. So you pick a job, because when you were little and you rescued someone and everybody said, "Weren't you good?" then, or some hero in your life was a rescuer, then you would use that, and you find that works for you there. You may become a nurturer of some type. Maybe you're nurturing people, caring for people in the sense of nursing, welfare, social work, any of those things, old people's homes, physiotherapists, any of those things, medical profession, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of jobs that are to do with the caring or nurturing profession, childcare, whatever it might be. And that would come from pleaser, because pleaser is the motivator for that. Not every person in those careers, of course, is operating from this point, because some of them are for different reasons, but many people are. Many people will make a choice of career based on what that psyche, that subpersonality they played in life that was appreciated when they were young. You might become a therapist. As you can see, therapist there. When we originally did that, we were going to write therapy. We were going to put the dash, because we couldn't fit the word in between the after THE, but we found that spelt the rapist. So we decided not to. I'm going down to my rapist for a session. You know, it was that sort of thing. It's a funny word, isn't it? Therapist, for that. You might choose a subpersonality structure because of that nurturing, caring kind of thing that went on. Next one, the clown subpersonality. This is a very popular one. The clown is the life and soul of the party, someone who is humorous or a wit or eccentric, a little bit mad, they're fun. Now, why do they choose that? Why does clown come up? And remember, you're not just restricted to one of these. Everyone's operating about 3 or 4 on average, even though there's probably a couple of hundred of them in there. So you find that with clown, you've become a person who's filled with fun, who can get people laughing, who can uplift their spirit. People love to be in the company of a clown, so that when you were young and you behaved in this kind of way, which brought humor into life, people appreciated and acknowledged you. No one's going to humiliate or reject someone who makes them feel good, obviously. So you found when you were young that by behaving in this way, people appreciated you, so you've kept that subpersonality in your collection of expression so that you can use it to survive appreciation and acknowledgement. It goes on from there. Next one we have here is aggressor. Now, an aggressor is somebody was talking about aggression earlier. An aggressor is somebody who has found out that aggression works for them. Nobody humiliated them when they were being aggressive, when they were young. They were tough, they were the bully, whatever it might be. And they found that worked for them. Even though it's unpleasant to live with and be with, people don't humiliate or reject them because they're afraid of getting a punch on the nose, basically. I remember at school when I was 6 years old, I remember this incident. There was a boy who was the school wimp, basically, and his name was Rupert. And the school bully would always pick on him on a regular basis. And one day, out of the blue, totally unexpectedly, the school bully was picking on him, and Rupert got into such a tiz about it that he lashed out with his hand, and he hit the bully on the nose, who was a bit bigger than him, and the nose bled, and the bully burst into tears and ran off. All the other children rushed up to Rupert and said, "God, isn't that great? Rupert's the hero." They grabbed Rupert, and they put him arm in arm, and Rupert then went on a celebration march around the playground, with everybody cheering Rupert. And from then on, Rupert became the tough guy that no one crossed. He went from being a wimp to an aggressor in that one single incident. And that aggression that he had, of course, carried him through for particularly that school life, until he probably got to a bigger school when somebody was much bigger than him and punched him back on the nose. An aggressor can be, if they're intellectual, can be a manipulator, someone who manipulates other people to get their own way. A manipulator is somebody who is, of course, being aggressive, in a way, or a rebel. What you find a lot of kids, when they're aggressive because of their background, they become rebels. They rebel against society. They project their own inner aggression, which they felt because of their upbringing, onto society. And they put safety pins through their nose or whatever it is, or do their hair in funny ways and all that sort of stuff, and they become very rebellious and deny society. You see a lot of it in students, anti-society things and what have you, which can be very good catalysts for changing society. But it all comes from this same personality structure that those particular people have. Nothing right or wrong with any of these. Please don't ever think that I shouldn't be this or I should be this. It's just the way life has formed for you due to your upbringing. Another very popular one, the slave subpersonality. The slave or the doormat. This is someone who behaves like a doormat, someone who's a slave. Now, they have found that by being a slave-like person, that people did not reject them. They appreciated them, because who wouldn't like to have a pliable slave around who was willing to be there and do everything, do all the washing up, the ironing, the cleaning, the cooking, or whatever it is, drive you to work, whatever. You'd think this is terrific. So a slave kind of subpersonality, the doormat kind of subpersonality, has allowed that person to survive. Unpleasant though it might be, at least they're surviving. At least they're surviving. Someone who's a slave can also be a puppet or a martyr. A martyr is a slave subpersonality. You know the type? I gave my life for you. Why could you treat me like this? Why are you leaving me? I gave everything. I gave my life to you. Well, that's what a martyr's for. So if you play it, you're going to experience it. Another good one for slave is hypochondriac. You know, they're slave to the imaginary symptoms, medical symptoms that they haven't got but imagine they have got. So it's just another slave subpersonality structure. A slave, by the way, goes very well with an aggressor because they're two disowned self. The aggressor has disowned the slave within themselves, buried that deeply, and the slave has buried very deeply the aggressor. So they find each other fascinating and attractive and often get involved with each other. Well, off they go. Okay, next one down is the pusher. Now this is a very, very big one. The pusher. The pusher is the one that allows you to get up in the morning, to go, to be punctual, to get the job done. You're a money maker. If you want to make money, you need a pusher in the beginning. All this is the kind of thing, a pusher, a motivator, someone who's motivated. You find the A-type personalities that they define for heart disease and so on are all very strong pusher. They've got all that going on in them, and they're pushing and they're pushing and they're pushing and they're pushing, and they can never relax. And they keep going, they don't know how to let go at all. And they're pusher subpersonalities. They can be fine. We all need a bit of a pusher. You've got to have some pusher. But the game, as you'll see in a minute, is not to get stuck as any of them. That's the mistake, to try and be one or the other of them. And the last one we have is the slug. The slug. This is the one who loves to lie around, the lazy bones, or the couch potato. This is a wonderful, assistant to the pusher. It's the opposite of the pusher, basically. And we all know that one where you just like to settle down on the couch, maybe in the banana lounge in the garden, lying on the beach, dozing around, that sort of thing. The slug, a wonderful sort of lying on a rock in the sun next to the river. Ah, peace. Oh, isn't that wonderful? That's fine. That's exactly as it should be. The trouble is, for many people, is they don't realize that they are made up of a multiplicity of these things, a multiplicity of these subpersonality structures. For instance, you may be a pusher, a big pusher, and as the big pusher, you find it very difficult to relax, let's say, and you go along to a lot of sales courses, motivational courses, you go into business, and you get very revved up. You go rah, rah, rah at those things. In fact, a lot of people go to motivational courses, and you've got to ask yourself, in whatever situation you're in, who is here, referring to which subpersonality is here? Who is here today at that, let's say you go to one of these American motivational sales courses, that sort of thing. They had one here last night. There was some sort of network thing going on, and they're all, kind of rah-rah-rahing it along, and that's great, and as is appropriate as it should be for those kinds of things. But the trouble is that you go to those things. There's a guy called Tony Robbins. Anybody heard of Tony Robbins here? Yeah, a few people? Okay, Tony's a terrific coach, a coach, sales coach type, and he gets you there, and he gets a whole room, and he gets them all shouting. They all wave their hands in the air, and they go rah, 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 and we're going to do it, and yes, yes, all that sort of wonderful charge. And you leave that course, $1,000 going, wow, yes, I'm going to conquer the world, isn't that great? Now, who's that talking? That's the pusher. So the pusher's really charged up. But then you go home, and you relax, you sit down, and the footy's on, and you open a can of beer, and out comes the slug. And there goes your $1,000. It's gone, because the slug's out, and the pusher's gone back, oh yeah, well that was a great course, but fly fishing now. So this is the trouble. You've got to know who is there in any situation in your life. Now the trick to it all, of course, is to go for, as we see at the top, aware ego and awareness. Aware ego and awareness. If you imagine an orchestra with a conductor, the conductor has the orchestra in front of him. The conductor has the trombones, the oboes, the violins, the cellos, etc., whatever it might be, all around there to conduct. And he or she might bring up the trombones, the violins at different times, and so on. And that conductor is the centerpiece of the orchestra. Without that, the orchestra is just all out of the playing its own tune. Maybe it succeeds sometimes, maybe it goes out other times. But that's how it works. Now, the aware ego is the part of yourself, part of your awareness, that can observe the functioning of your personalities, the personality structures. The idea in life is to, as quickly as you can, move yourself to the point of aware ego, so that, like the conductor in the orchestra, you can bring forward, as appropriate, the subpersonality that you need at any point in time to express itself, whatever it might be that you want to express. So you make sure that at work you bring your pusher forward to get on with the job, if you've got that kind of job. But when you get home to your, let's say you're a male businessman, you've got a strong pusher, and you get home to your girlfriend or your wife, she doesn't want the pusher around. She wants the romantic, the lover, the kind, compassionate, whatever it might be. The last thing she wants is some bulldozer coming in and going, I did this at work, and She doesn't want that. What she wants is, violins and the romance and I love you or whatever it might be. Or playing with the family or whatever the situation is. What you need to be able to do is, in a split second, change the energy, because each subpersonality is an energy in itself. It has a different quality of energy. Is change the energy that you are in at each point of time so that you can bring forward appropriately the personality expression that you want to. So if you're in a situation which requires self-confidence, you can bring that forward. If you're in a situation where creativity is required, you can bring that forward. If you're in a situation where gentleness, kindness, loving behavior is required, you can bring that forward. If you're in a situation where tremendous focus and concentration of mind on a particular job, let's say, then you can bring that forward as well. It's a matter of learning how to bring them forward. The trouble is, for most of us, is that we are locked, buried underwater, inside a small group, 4 or 5 subpersonalities, which have coagulated together that we believe are ourselves. We believe that's me because we're so familiar with them and they feel right. Because of familiarity, we don't realize that we have many, many more, perhaps a couple of hundred subpersonalities available in our psyche to be able to express ourselves in whatever way that we want. You have within yourself a complete range of expression, that, because by the time you're 6 months old, you've expressed every emotion anyway, you've felt every fear, every excitement, and everything has all gone in by the time you're 6 months or 9 months at the most. So we have all those in seed form within us, but we tend to narrow ourselves down and express ourselves in a monotonous way, perhaps, a limited way, certainly. And the idea is to wake these things up. Now, what holds them down, what is in the beach balls, are subpersonality structures. So your beach ball will be a subpersonality, little group, perhaps, of beach balls in one subpersonality structure that is held there within you. And as you start to change, it is these that are flushed out of you. It is these that come to the surface. It is these that will respond in your 70 times 7. When you do your 70 times 7, you will find that even your handwriting will change as you go through it. Very common. 3 or 4 different styles of handwriting come out. This is because each subpersonality has its own handwriting as well. And you will literally, bizarre as it may seem, as you handwrite away, you'll find it'll scrawl, it'll change, it'll be quite different types of handwriting as each of these subpersonalities that are buried within you have the opportunity to express themselves. Opportunity to express themselves in whatever way it is that they want. Now that's the basic structure of the personality so far. Before I go on, we'll just take a couple of questions on subpersonalities. We'll just take half a dozen questions about that. Yeah.
If that's the case then, Michael, is there some advantage if one chooses to use a computer, like me, that one would benefit by doing at least some handwork? And
you would benefit by doing some handwork with your 70 times 7, definitely.
And possibly using left hand as well as right?
We'll get onto that in a minute, yeah.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. Yes. Who's got this mic over there? Anybody there? Anybody else got a question? Where are you? Yeah.
This side.
Okay, great, thank you. Yes.
Just interested in being, I'm one of 6 children.
Right.
And am very much, or we all are very much yes people. Spend our life doing things for everyone else and not so much for yourself.
Right.
Is that a pattern that's developed because being one of such a large family?
That's
Or
right.
is
It can easily be that. It's not necessarily that, but it sounds like it is in your case if they all have the pattern. That can be common in large families, up to 10, 13 kids or whatever, because of the nature. The reality is that you have to toe the line with so many people there, whereas an individual child doesn't have to deal with that. But whatever the pattern is, it can be changed. But certainly that's a possibility.
Thank you.
Who's got the mic? Yes. Catch the assistant's eye if you can.
I just want to know, is there any inheritance that a child gets when it's born, like his behaviour or personality?
Genetically?
Genetically, yes.
There is definitely some genetic exchange, but we don't know what yet. There is no evidence that's going to define it.
I've got a brother who's a very clean person, and he cleans up after himself, and he's always taking care of me. We're twins. I've just had a child, and he's a spit image of my brother. The kid's 4 years old, and he cleans the bathroom.
Right, okay.
It's not me.
It's not you, okay, that's great. Certainly there's no question that things can go on, but on the other hand, he could be your disowned self. You would be your brother's disowned self, and he would be your disowned self. Does that make sense? So you might pass that on in that way. That's another possibility.
Me and my brother, two different people. I'm an outspoken person.
That's right.
My brother's is held back and is...
Yes. That's often the case with twins. Often you will play out each other's disowned selves. It's quite a common thing. And so it's possible for that to be passed down to the children as well. It's very interesting, this whole area. Who's next?
You mentioned over on your right.
On my right. Oh, yes, thank you.
You mentioned the rule maker is the conscience.
That's correct, yeah.
Does conscience depend on how we're brought up? Do some people not have a conscience at all?
It depends on your conditioning. There's certainly people who haven't got certainly people who don't feel bad about what they do. There's no question of that at all. Their rule maker is very, very weak, or the rules are that I'm going to do whatever I want to do. It's that kind of rule. So it's certainly what is a conscience? It's a voice you hear in your head. If it's a voice you hear in your head, then it's got to be part of the subpersonality. What part is it? It's the rule maker, because the conscience lists the rules that you have to follow in order to feel bad or good. If you're going to feel bad, the critic comes in and says you are bad. So that's why the two are linked together. So it depends again on the conditioning that's gone in. There are certainly some people who have, in inverted commas, no conscience or no rule maker, or their rules are very unpleasant. Who's the next one? Yes.
But with an aggressor, wouldn't they have no conscience because they feel so aggressive about things? Then wouldn't they just forget about everything else?
Yeah, some of them would, some of them wouldn't. Some of them feel very bad after their aggression. What comes in is the sorrowful one comes in, or the self-flagellator comes in. Oh, why did I do that? You get that one. Who's next? Anybody else got a mic on?
You were saying that you can change your personality, like you've got the pusher at work, and then you've got to turn into the romantic at home, or whatever the situation is. You're going to have to face up to people who are going to accuse you of changing your personality. They'll say, oh yes, but you don't know the other side of that person, change with the wind.
That's a very interesting point. Yes, certainly that's a possibility. The most common remark a divorce lawyer hears is, I never really knew they were like that about the partner that they're divorcing. What has happened is that trust has built in the relationship. The protector-controller, because trust has built, has relaxed and allowed the subpersonalities that have not had a chance to express themselves to come to the surface. They then express themselves, and often they're negative or powerful or, perhaps aggressive or whatever. They come to the surface, and that gives the partner a shock because they've been relating only to one or two or three little subpersonalities, and suddenly up comes a new one, and you think, oh, so that's what you're really like underneath. You've been like that all the time, and you never let me know. Well, I'm out of here, pal. And of course, that in itself is a stupid mistake, because it's just another one. Because underneath those there's more, and underneath those there's more. And once you clear them, of course, then you can learn in your relationship, in the closeness of your relationship, to relax the protector-controller at will consciously and allow the vulnerability, the unconditional love, the sweetness, the kindness, the warmth, the bliss, the divine ecstasy to come to the surface as it is in a small baby. And you, as an adult, of course, it's magnified thousandfold, and you can feel this sweetness of the essence of your being. That's when you can consciously do it. It doesn't mean you're always vulnerable. It means that you, as the conductor in the orchestra, bring forward, as appropriate, the behavior structure, the subpersonality structure that is required for that situation. So at work, you bring forward those ones. At home, you bring forward those ones. And that's how it works. So it's not, people may accuse you of changing personality, but you're not at all. You're just expressing yourself in another way. It's not like split personality. That's a clinical condition based on trauma as a young child, a war zone, a car crash, or a physical abuse or sexual abuse. That's what causes a split in the personality. This is not that. This is the way the personality is for us all, because we all relate differently to our friends as we do to our parents, perhaps, and we relate differently to our lover than we do to our boss. Unless we want to raise, I suppose. You know what I mean? But it's a different way of relating. Do you see what I mean? We do that anyway, so it's not odd or unusual. Okay?
Michael, can I just add something else to that?
Yes.
It's pretty important. I've got a member of my family close to me who fits into the slave, puppet, martyr, hypochondriac thing.
Yes.
And who also carries something with her right from childhood to
Right.
their family. How do you go about, like, I'd like her to have been here, but how do you go about changing that whole thing, because you can see it's ruining the whole life of that
She has to do it herself. Nobody can do it for her. She has to do it herself. So try and make it come while I'm here. If not, then get her started in personal growth, make her read, give her my book to read or something to start, because until people start to say to themselves, well, it's me, there's nothing you can do to help them. Nothing. They have to do it to themselves. So your best idea for anybody who has friends is to try and encourage and inspire them to get on the personal growth path of some sort or another, and maybe just give them the book to read can be a good start for many of them. Now, there is a brilliant system that's been invented by Dr. Helen Sidra Stone of California, who I mentioned. I just went and spent some time with them, taping them for a series. A system called voice dialogue. Voice dialogue is, and I'm just going to explain it briefly, and then we're going to try something which is a sort of association of that. Voice dialogue is a technique whereby you can access the subpersonalities at will, consciously, literally, bizarre as it may seem. And I had studied this quite deeply with them. I had some experiences of voice dialogue earlier, many, many years ago, where I was taken back to being a 7-year-old child, and it happened like this. The facilitator sits opposite the client. I was the client. And I'd heard about voice dialogue, that you could access things very easily, and I thought, I'll go along and have a look at that. So I came and I didn't have any issues to deal with. You can deal with any issue in voice dialogue, like a dream image, a behavioral thing. You want to find the business person within you, the lover within you. You want to get rid of a problem, whatever it might be. It's a terrific technique, and I'm going to give you a couple of examples to show you how it works. So I sat opposite, Lydia Duncan was the name of the woman who did it, a wonderful woman. And I said, I want to speak to the child within me. That's all I could think of. I heard you could do this. So she said, fine, move your seat to wherever you feel drawn to. So I did. So I stood up, and I felt drawn to sit on the floor over there. So I went over there, and I sat on the floor. And when I sat on the floor, I suddenly found, literally within 10 seconds, I suddenly found myself feeling very small. I'd never had this experience before. And I'm quite big, as you can see. I found myself very small. And then I started to find myself looking around the room, chewing my little finger like a little 7-year-old. And I looked around. He said, hello, she said. How are you? I said, I'm very well. And I found myself literally feeling physically smaller, looking up at this woman, who was a very nice woman, Lydia. And she said to me, what's going on in your life? How old are you now? And I said, I'm 7 years old. I literally felt 7, and said 7, and she said, what's going on in your life? And I started to flash in that moment, have clear memories of what was going on in my life at 7 years old. I was just started a new school, what was going on at home with my parents, my brother and sister, and so on. And we had this conversation. Then after 10 minutes, she said, okay, have you anything more to say? I said, no. She said, come back to the middle. So I got up, went back to the middle and sat down. When I sat down, I came back to the full adult male that I'm obviously today. I was so stunned and amazed that it could happen. Literally, that's all that happened. There's no hypnosis, no meditation, no trancey things, nothing. Purely conversation, coupled with the physical movement coming back to the middle, which is the aware ego. This is how they get you into aware ego on this particular system, aware ego. I was so stunned with that I went along to a teacher's training with Helen Sidra Stone. This was over 10 years ago, and have since trained many people in it, and I've made the series and all that sort of thing about it. It is such an extraordinarily easy thing, and what is beautiful about this mind work is that it is not complicated, that your mind is your tool. It will respond to your instructions. It will do that automatically. It is designed to do that. It will do that. So if you're feeling lethargic and bored and lazy in life, the mind is responding to that physically. You tell yourself, oh, life's a bitch, and then you're dead. You know what I mean? What's going to happen? Exactly that. Mm-hmm. Anything like that, if you physically slob around or whatever it is, then of course that's tied up with your mind and so on. The mind will obey. So if you ask you shall receive. You've heard that old saying from the Bible, obviously. Ask, you shall receive. If you ask for a subpersonality to come forward, it will come forward, as long as you don't block it, as long as you're open to it. Now, I'll tell you a couple of quick stories about this so you can understand it. Then we're going to go into a way that you can do it for yourself without needing to go to a facilitator for $80 or $100 an hour. You're going to be able to do it yourself on your own. But let me explain a couple of stories for you first. This was a young boy who was allergic to orange juice. He couldn't drink orange juice without coming out in hives all over his body from head to foot. And that was obviously very, very difficult. You can imagine. You know what hives are? The white, itchy sort of lumps. Very uncomfortable. So they took him along to the system. Put him in one subpersonality where he sipped his orange juice, he came out, started to come out in hives. They moved him across to another subpersonality entirely, and when they did that, he could drink as much orange juice as he liked without a single hive appearing. They moved him back across the room. When he went back across the room again, same thing happened. Sip, hives, moved him back. As he moved back, the hives disappeared. Why, we don't know. But of course, there's obviously a psychological component to his allergy, as we say. Hives in that case. Another guy we had come to one of our own voice dialogue training sessions. I report this in my book, but I'll tell you again because it's a good story. Robert was his name. He was an entrepreneur, very successful in his own field, laid-back kind of guy. But all his life, he had suffered from a back pain, a recurring back pain. And he tried everything. There was nothing physically wrong with him. He tried, the medical profession. He tried osteopaths, chiropractors, Reiki healings, hypnotherapy, physiotherapy, deep tissue massage, everything. Nothing could get rid of it because it would come and go. He came along with his wife to voice dialogue, and we showed them how to do it, and off they went. So his wife, he sat in the middle. His wife facilitated him. And he wanted to talk to the back pain, because you can talk to any illness as well. So she said, okay, move your chair. He moved his chair, and his wife said, who are you? And the first personality that came out identified itself as control. Said, I am control. And his wife said, are you the cause of the back pain? And control said, no, you'll have to talk to guilt about that. Literally, this is how it worked, exactly how it worked. So, okay, he said, so she moved his chair to guilt. When he got to guilt, he sat down. His wife said, hello, who are you? He said, I'm Guilt. What's your story, she said. He said, well, I'm in a kindergarten. I'm 3 years old in the kindergarten, and there's a low tree in the kindergarten that grows with a little sort of bend like that in it, and the kids used to swing on it and play on it. But a bird had built its nest in the fork of the tree, and all the children in the kindergarten was told, do not, under any circumstances, climb the tree because we don't want to disturb the bird's nest. The birds laid eggs there, and we want to see the birds grow. Nice thing for the kindergarten. But while nobody was looking, he did. He climbed the tree, and he got up to look at the nest, and as he was looking at it, he knocked it, and the nest fell down to the ground, and the 2 eggs smashed on the ground. And as they smashed, the crash, everybody turned and looked at him, and he was caught, and of course felt guilty as hell. So she said, are you the cause of the back pain then? And Guilt said, no, you'll have to talk to shock horror about that. Literally. So he moved his chair to shock horror. And shock horror comes out as a just under a year-old child. And can't speak, as that age, but you can still speak in the voice dialogue session because you still have your adult faculties. You don't lose those. You can observe. And so the wife said, what is the story with this, with who you are, shock horror? And he said, oh, well, I'm being taken out on a float board by my father on a lake or a pond, and as I go out, I realize, he's walking next to me, I realize that I'm going out of my depth in the water. and the water is deeper than I can't swim, and I start to become frightened. I start to scream and scream and scream. But then my father says, don't be silly, be a man, which is a bit silly to a 1-year-old baby. Don't be silly, be a man, and kept pushing me out. And at that point, I was so frightened, I was so freaked out, I'm screaming and crying that I made a decision that for the rest of my life, if ever I was in a situation where I was not in full control, I would lock up a muscle in my back to remind me to get back into control once again as soon as possible. Control, of course, is tied up with survival, so obviously it's going to do something like that. So his wife said, are you the cause of the back pain? He said, yes, I am. That's what I do. Whenever he's in a situation where he's not in control, I cause his back to knot up. Now you can imagine how many situations in life you're not in full control. Sitting in a plane, passenger in a car, all those sorts of things. You can't possibly be in full control in that sense all the time. So his wife said, well, look, it's not possible for him to be in control. Now that he knows this, now that he's got his act, he was an entrepreneur. He'd never worked for anybody in his life, so his choice was made by that too. He'd never been an employee. He'd always been an entrepreneur. He had 6 shops that he owned himself, so he'd never been under somebody who could control him. And she said, obviously, this isn't doing him any good. Can you stop doing this now that he knows that? And so Shokora said, okay, I won't do it anymore. She said, great, thank you. Come back to the middle. He came back to the middle, stunned, as you can imagine. And when he got to the middle, he said, whew, it was amazing, no back pain, and the back pain has never returned again. This was probably 7 years ago now that we did this, 6 or 7 years ago. See? Psychological power. Don't just rely on one form of cure or healing in your life. Look widely. Look at the psychological, look at the emotional, look at the physical, look at the medical, look at the alternative, all those kinds of things. But it certainly is a funny coincidence that should happen. There are many other examples like that. The subpersonality structure is very potent and very powerful. It decides your life experience. It decides it. All right, now, there is